I remember the first night I drove through that mountain pass. Fog hung low in the air, curling around jagged cliffs and tall pines, swallowing the road ahead. My headlights barely pierced the thick mist, casting fractured beams on rocks slick with dew. Every turn of the road felt endless, echoing with a faint rustle of unseen movement. Then I noticed lights, small, flickering, hovering in the distance, floating in ways that defied reason. They seemed to follow me, vanish, then reappear farther up the pass. My pulse slowed as a cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying a soft, humming sound I couldn't place. That's when I saw it, a light closer than it should be, and a shadow moving alongside it. I never should have stepped out of the car. The road was a slick, black ribbon in the rain. My headlights carved a weak tunnel through the dark, nothing but pine trees and stone walls and the fog. It didn't just roll. IT settled to a thick, white silence that swallowed the world whole. The steering wheel felt cold under my hands. MY knuckles were white. I leaned forward, my breath a small cloud against the glass, trying to see. There was only the gray, the deep, endless gray. The tires hummed a low, steady note on the asphalt, a familiar sound. But then another hum joined it, deeper, not from the car. I turned the radio down. The dial clicked into silence, but the hum remained a low, vibrating pressure in my ears, felt in my teeth. It came from outside, from the fog itself. I kept driving. The road coiled tighter, a sharp curve MY headlights swept across the wet rock face of the mountain, and for a second I saw something. A glint, not water, something else that a flicker of dark, wet stone, and then movement. Just in the corner of my eye dot, a twitch dot, a shift in the pattern of shadows between the trees. Gone when I turned my head. My heart was a dull thud in my chest. I gripped the wheel tighter. Told myself it was a fog, playing tricks, making the shadows breathe. Another curve. The trees thinned, replaced by a steep drop into nothing. The guardrail was a thin, broken line, and the fog, it was thicker here than a solid wall of white. The hum grew louder. Not a sound you hear, a sound you feel at a deep resonance in the bones of your skull, not a pressure. Something moved in the rear view mirror, a dark shape. Fleeing to the trees behind me, and my foot jerked just a little. The car swerved. Tires hissed on the wet road. I steadied the wheel, that MY breath caught in my throat, and I looked back into the mirror. Only shifting fog, and those same twitching shadows, keeping pace. I couldn't tell how fast I was going anymore. The world had shrunk to this. The dashboard's soft green glow, the hiss of the tires, the crushing weight of the white silence outside. And then the headlights died. Not a flicker, not a dimming. They just went out, swallowed by the fog. I was driving blind, and a cocoon of gray MY foot slammed on the brake. The car slid just a little before stopping. The engine was still running. The dashboard lights were still on. But ahead of me, nothing but an absolute formless white. The hum was all around me now, filling the car at a deep, droning note that made my teeth ache. I could feel it in the steering wheel that I in the seat. I sat there, the MY hands frozen on the wheel. Staring into the void, MY own pale face looked back from the windshield, a ghost trapped in the glass. A shadow passed in front of the car to a tall, thin shape, blurred by the FOG. IT didn't walk, shifted from one spot to another, without moving in between. I closed my eyes just for a second, hoping it was a trick of the light out of my tired mind. When I opened them, the hum had stopped. The sudden silence was louder than the noise had been, a ringing, empty silence. The fog was still there, impenetrable. I sat for a long time, listening to the quiet tick of the cooling engine, watching the fog, waiting for it to part. It never did. I put the car in drive and crept forward, into the white, into the silence. The road beneath me felt the same, but I knew with a cold certainty I was no longer on the mountain. The air in the woods was cold that night, the damp, biting cold that seeped right through my jacket. I could feel it in my bones. MY breath bloomed in front of me, a small, pale cloud in the deep blue dark. I was walking the old trail behind my house at a path I'd walked 100 times before, but tonight it felt different. The trees seemed to stand a little closer. Their branches, like thin black bones, reached down. The only sound was the soft crunch of my boots on frozen leaves and the rustle of a nervous wind. That's when I saw it at a single point of light. Far ahead, with a path curving to the pines, IT was just hovering there, a tiny, shimmering star that had fallen to Earth. IT pulsed, softly out a slow, steady rhythm, like a silent heartbeat. At first, I thought it was a firefly, but it was the wrong season, the wrong color. This light was a pale, sickly yellow. It was too steady, too still that I stopped walking, that I held my breath. The woods had gone completely silent around me. The wind had died. The leaves were still as if the forest itself was holding its breath, too. Then the light moved. IT didn't drift like a spark in the air. IT darted a quick, sharp glide to the left. IT floated between two thick oak. IT moved against the wind, and a breeze was pushing against my face, cold and steady. But the light slid sideways, cutting through it. Unaffected, unbound, my skin prickled out a faint static feeling at the back of my neck. This was wrong. This was deeply, quietly wrong that I took a single step forward. MY boot snapped a twig. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. The light flickered violently. Then it steadied itself. IT seemed to pulse a little brighter, as if it had noticed me. A low hum touched the edges of my hearing, just so faint. I felt it more than I heard it, a vibration in my teeth, a thrumming in the space behind my eyes. The pale light began to shift again. That IT weaved through the trees, and as it moved, the fog around it began to change. The mist that clung to the forest floor started to bend. IT swirled in the light's wake, twisting into shapes. Long, thin fingers of vapor reached out at a form, tall and wavering, seemed to gather in a haze. IT had no face and no features, just a suggestion of figure, made of fog and shadow. IT mirrored the light's path for a moment. Then it dissolved back into the general gloom. MY heart was a dull drum in my chest. I could feel its beat in my throat. I couldn't look away. The light drifted back toward the center of the path. IT hung there, pulsating to an invitation or a warning. The hum grew a little louder. IT was the sound of a distant power line, the sound of a dead channel on an old television, a empty, waiting noise. I took another step, and the light went out. IT didn't fade. IT didn't drift away. IT was just gone, vanished between one blink and the next. The hum stopped. The woods were plunged into a silence, so deep it felt heavy. IT pressed against my eardrums. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness where it had been. MY eyes tried to find a shape, any movement at all, but there was only the deep, solid black of the pines, and a faint, cold smell of frost and decaying leaves. A final, solitary crunch echoed as I shifted my weight. Then nothing. The light was gone, but the silence it left behind felt different now. IT felt watchful. The air up on the cliff was thin and cold. IT tasted like pine needles and damp stone. I stood there at the edge of the woods, looking at it. The old lookout tower, the dark skeleton of wood, and rusted nails against the bruised evening sky. IT leaned toward the cliff, a tired man nodding off. One good push in the wind. I thought, point one good push, and it would all come down. I hadn't planned on coming here. MY boots had just carried me, following a deer trail that got thinner and thinner, until it ended here. AT this place. A soft yellow light flickered in the topmost window to a weak, blinking glow, like a dying firefly, on, then off, then on again. There was no rhythm to it, just a tired, random pulse. No one had been up here for years. Everyone in town said so. The path was overgrown. The forest was reclaiming its space, but that light, it kept breathing. I placed a hand on the bottom ladder rung. The wood was soft, spongy with our old teeth. IT felt like old bones. The whole structure groaned a low, deep sound from its core. IT was a sound of warning, the plea to be left alone. But I started to climb, and my heart was a frantic bird in my chest. Each step was a betrayal. The wood sagged under my weight. Splinters bit into my palms. The wind whispered to the broken slats. IT was a hollow, lonely sound. I reached the trap door, pushed it open. The smell that fell out was ancient, dust and dry rot, and something else, something sweet, like forgotten flowers pressed in a book. The floorboards were a map of decay. Gaps showed the dark, long drop to the ground. Shadows lived here. They didn't move like normal shadows. They were thick. They clung to the corners, stretching themselves across the floor, long, dark fingers reaching for nothing. In the center of the single room, an old chair lay on its side. Next to it, a shattered oil lamp. Its glass glittered like fallen stars in the dim light. But the light wasn't coming from a lamp. It came from the far window, that flickering pale glow as I walked toward it. Each footstep was too loud in the silence. The floor whined beneath me to high, pained noise. I looked out the window. The view should have been the whole valley, the river, the town lights far away. But the glass was thick with grime. Caked with the dust of decades, I could only see smudges of color, shapes in the gloom. I reached out, wiped a clean circle with my sleeve. The glass was cold. Unnaturally so, the deep, biting cold that seeped into my skin. I looked through my little window. The flickering stopped. The light from the window simply went out. Not like a lamp being turned off, but like a breath being held. The room was plunged into a deep, heavy dark, a dark you could feel. IT pressed against my eyes, filled my ears with silent hum. I stood perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid the whole tower would feel my weight and give up in the silence. I heard it, a soft, shuffling step. Behind me dot on the broken floorboards. It wasn't my step, that my feet were planted. IT was a slow, careful drag, like something heavy being pulled. I didn't want to turn, I didn't want to see, but my body turned anyway to a slow, stiff pivot. The darkness was complete. I could see the gaps in the walls, patches of the starry night sky. But inside the tower, the black was absolute, the solid thing. Then a shadow within the shadow, darker than the rest of IT shifted. IT didn't have a shape. IT was just a presence, a concentration of the dark. It moved toward me, not with steps, but a slow, flowing drift, like ink spreading in water. There was no sound, not even a rustle, just a feeling of the air getting colder, heavier. It was close now, so close I could feel the chill radiating from it, a winter cold. The smell of damp earth filled my nose, that sweet, rotten smell from before. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream, I was frozen there, looking into a darkness that had no end. A single, sharp crack echoed through the tower. The floorboard right in front of me splintered, giving way. The sound broke the spell. I stumbled back, MY's shoulder hitting the rotten wall. I didn't look back. I scrambled for the trap door, and MY hand slipping on the ladder. I fell the last few feet, landing hard on the damp earth. The impact jarred my teeth. I looked up. The tower stood silent against the sky, dark, still, and from the highest window, the light flickered once more to a single, slow pulse, like a winking eye. Then it went dark again and stayed that way. The air was cold that afternoon, a sharp, clean cold that smelled of pine and wet earth. I was walking the old fire road behind my house, the one the forest was slowly reclaiming. Gravel crunched under my boots, a dry, lonely sound. The trees were a solid wall of dark green on either side of me. Their shadows were long, reaching for me. The light was fading, turning from gold to a dull grayish blue. And up ahead I saw it, a single rusted signpost. It was bent at a painful angle, as if something heavy had leaned on it for a very long time. The metal was flaked with rust the color of old blood. It creaked, a low, groaning sound that seemed to come from its very core. Not a fast creak, but a slow, rhythmic one, like a tired heartbeat. I stopped a few feet away. The paint was mostly gone, but I could just make out a faded arrow, pointing straight into the woods, into a part of the forest I never visited. The trees were thicker there, the shadows between them deeper. I took a step closer, my breath plumed in the air, and that's when I saw it, a flicker of movement. There, between two tall pines, a tall, thin shape, pale against the dark trunks. It was there for a second, then it was gone. I blinked. My heart was a dull thud in my chest. Just my eyes, tired from the dim light, playing tricks. I looked back at the signpost. Its groan was the only sound. Then another movement, to my left this time, a darker shape, slipping behind a thicket of ferns. It didn't walk. It shifted. There one moment. Gone the next. The air felt still, heavy. The chirping of the birds had stopped. The forest was holding its breath. I was completely alone, but I didn't feel alone. I could feel them, the shapes, watching from the spaces between the trees. Never clear, always just at the edge of my vision. A flicker of gray, a shift of shadow. They never made a sound. Then I felt it, a vibration through the soles of my boots. A low, deep hum. It came up through the ground, through my bones. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, filling the silence, filling me. The rusted signpost began to tremble. A fine shower of rust fell from its base. The humming grew, not in volume, but in intensity, a constant, resonant frequency. It made my teeth ache, my head feel fuzzy. The shapes in the woods became clearer, not because they moved closer, but because the humming seemed to sharpen them. I saw 3 of them now, standing perfectly still among the pines. Tall, impossibly thin, just waiting. The signpost let out a sharp, metallic shriek. It twisted another inch. The arrow now pointed directly at me. The humming stopped. The sudden silence was a physical shock. It was louder than the hum had been, a void of sound. My ears rang with the absence. The shapes were gone. The forest was just a forest again. The pale evening light filtered through the branches. A bird chirped tentatively in the distance. I looked at the signpost. It was just a piece of old, bent metal. Silent now. I took a step back. Then another. My legs felt weak. I turned and walked away. My footsteps were too loud on the gravel. I didn't look back. Not once. But all the way home, I could feel that silence following me, pressing in, and the faint, phantom hum, still buzzing in my bones. The air in the woods was cool that night, a damp chill that settled deep in my jacket. I was walking the path behind my house, a path I'd walked 100 times before. But tonight, it felt different. The silence was too thick, a heavy blanket smothering the usual rustle of leaves. I stopped, looked up into the thick canopy of pine and oak, and I saw them, small lights, hanging among the highest branches, like little lanterns. They glowed with a soft, pale yellow, the color of old paper. They didn't flicker like fire. They were constant, a steady, sickly glow. They just hung there, swaying, a slow, gentle swing, left to right, back and forth. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. Not a single leaf shivered. Yet the lanterns moved, a rhythmic, deliberate dance. I took a step closer. My boots made no sound on the damp earth. The only thing I could hear was my own breath, shallow, tight in my chest. I stared up at them, counted 7, then 8. Their light didn't reach the ground. It just stopped a few feet below them. The darkness began, a deep black nothing. And in that nothing, the shadows started to move. Beneath each lantern, the tree's shadow began to twist. It stretched, pulling away from the trunk like taffy. The shadows on the ground grew long and thin. They didn't look like branches anymore. They looked like arms, like slender, reaching fingers, clawing at the dirt. I took a step back. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. One of the lanterns directly above me shifted. It drifted down, floating through the branches without a sound. It stopped, hovering just at eye level. The light wasn't warm. It was cold, an empty chemical light. It hummed, a low, electric vibration that I felt in my teeth. The shadow beneath it writhed, coiling up from the forest floor like smoke, taking a shape, a tall, thin form, all sharp angles and stretched limbs. It had no face, no features at all, just a darkness deeper than the night around it. It stood there, silent, and I knew it was looking at me. The other lanterns began to descend, one by one, drifting down from their branches. Their soft light filled the space around me, casting long, dancing shadows from the trees. But the shadows the lanterns cast, they weren't tree shadows anymore. They were the shadows of people, twisted and wrong, arms too long, heads tilted at impossible angles. They moved, a slow, shuffling circle around me. Their feet made no sound. They left no prints in the soft ground. The hum from the lanterns grew louder, filling my head, a static buzz that drowned out my own thoughts. I could smell something then, a sweet smell, like rotting flowers, mixed with the sharp tang of ozone, like after a lightning strike. The tall shadow in front of me raised one of its long arms. It pointed a single, slender finger at my chest. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot, frozen not by cold, but by a pure, primal fear. The shadow took a step forward. Its movement was all wrong. A glide, not a step. The lanterns brightened, their pale yellow light washing over me. It felt cold, sickly. The shadow was close now, so close I could feel the empty space around it, a pocket of absolute cold. I closed my eyes. I couldn't look at it anymore. I just stood there, waiting. The hum was inside my skull. The sweet, rotten smell filled my lungs. And then it was gone. The hum stopped. The cold vanished. I forced my eyes open. The clearing was dark. The lanterns were gone. The shadows had vanished. I was alone. The forest was silent again. The normal night sounds were still absent. No crickets, no owls, just a deep, ringing silence. I turned, stumbled back toward the path. My legs were weak, trembling. I didn't look back. I just walked, and as I reached the edge of the woods, I caught a flicker from the corner of my eye. I turned, back in the deep black between the trees. A single, small lantern, swaying gently, left to right, back and forth, without any wind at all. The wind had grown thin and cold. Salt and damp stone clung to my skin. The cliffside jutted into the fog like a jagged tooth. I found the cave when the tide had pulled back, its mouth a narrow black slit, and pale light trembling faintly within. I stepped closer. The rocks beneath my feet were slick with moss, and a faint hum lingered in the hollow air. It was soft, warped, like a whisper caught in a jar. Shapes flickered just beyond the light, moving too fast to hold. I squinted and the shadows dissolved. Nothing. A hollow smell, earth, wet stone, and something old, filled my nose. I thought I heard breathing, but my own chest rose and fell with the same rhythm. The hum inside seemed to pulse in time. I reached the cave's threshold. The walls were narrow, jagged, closing around me, and the faint light painted everything pale blue, as if the sun had forgotten this place. I felt something brush my hand, cold, quick, and almost gentle. It vanished before I could react, leaving only the echo of movement. Deeper in, the whispers grew. They were distorted, warped, like fragments of words I almost knew. I tried to listen, tried to make sense of the hum. My footsteps were soft on stone. Each step seemed to awaken the cave, and a chill crept up my spine. The light flickered, shifting, revealing a shape that crouched just at the corner of my vision, gone when I looked directly. I tried to tell myself it was only reflection, only shadows playing tricks. But the air felt heavier here and my skin prickled. A rustling came from deeper in. Slow, careful, something moving just out of reach. The hum warped, bending around me, twisting into a low, distant laugh, or maybe a sigh. I knelt to touch the wall. The stone was slick, colder than outside, and wetness seeped between my fingers. The smell of earth was stronger here, damp and sharp, like the cave had been breathing. I realized I was holding my breath. The whispers pulsed in my chest. Shapes flickered again, faster, smaller. Eyes? I couldn't tell. The deeper I went, the narrower the cave became, and the hum thickened, wrapping around my thoughts, making it hard to think. I wanted to step back, but something drew me forward, soft, impossible, insistent. At the very end, the pale light pooled on a small hollow, smooth and round, almost like a face pressed from the inside. It seemed to watch me. The hum slowed. I felt a presence heavy and patient, waiting. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Something inside me wanted to run, but my legs refused. And then the light flickered once more. The shapes vanished. The whispers softened into nothing, and I was left with only the damp walls, the smell of wet stone, and the faint hollow echo of my own heartbeat. I stepped out slowly. The wind had grown stronger, salt lashing my skin. The fog swallowed the cave mouth, and the hollow hum receded, leaving only silence. I walked back along the cliffside, shivering, knowing the cave had not released me. Not entirely. It waits. The trail begins narrow, almost hidden beneath tangled brambles. Fog clings to my ankles, curling over roots and fallen leaves. Each step presses softly into the damp earth. A pale light drifts ahead. It wavers, uncertain, like it doesn't want to be followed. I pause. The silence stretches, thick and almost breathing. The branches overhead scrape together. A faint rustle moves through the undergrowth. I tell myself it's just the wind. But the wind doesn't hesitate like that. The path twists again. Moss coats the stones slick beneath my shoes. The fog swirls differently here, heavier, smelling faintly of wet pine and old soil. Another light flickers. Closer now, not a lantern, more like a glow from something that has forgotten where it belongs. I step carefully. Twigs snap, softly, underfoot. My breath drags, catching in the damp air. A shadow moves along the path, just at the edge of my vision. I shouldn't look, but curiosity hums low, a pulse against my ribs. The undergrowth whispers as I pass, brushing my arms. It leaves a trace of earth and decay. The trail narrows even further. Roots twist like gnarled fingers, reaching for my ankles. The fog presses into my face, cool and wet. Every inhale tastes like mist and something older, something waiting. A pale light drifts past me, too slow, too deliberate. It leaves behind a faint glow on the leaves, like frost that shouldn't be there. I step into it. The air thickens. A hum rises, just under my hearing, like the memory of a song. Soft footsteps follow behind me. I know they aren't mine. They pause when I pause, hesitate when I hesitate. I want to turn, but I don't. The fog curls tighter around the trees. Branches arch overhead, forming shapes in the dim light. Faces, maybe, or just tricks of shadow. The smell of damp pine sharpens, with something iron-like beneath it. The path dips suddenly. A small clearing opens, barely wide enough to breathe. The lights float here, in clusters now. They twist lazily, almost aware of me. I kneel, brushing my fingers through the wet leaves. The hum grows a fraction louder. A cold breeze snakes between my legs, lifting the fog. I shiver, not from the cold, but from the attention. Something shifts behind me, soft, deliberate, just outside my vision. A shadow, elongated, merging with the fog. It doesn't move like a person. It moves like a thought, slow and searching. I rise, stepping lightly. The trail continues, winding again into darker undergrowth. Lights fade and reappear, flickering like hesitant stars trapped low. The hum lingers, almost comforting, almost threatening. The forest smells of damp moss and decaying wood. A rustle, then silence. I pause. The path seems emptier now, yet I feel eyes, or something like eyes, watching. The trail curves once more. Branches scrape softly above, scratching at my jacket. A final light hovers ahead. It's pale, fragile, trembling as if it might vanish if I stare too long. I step forward. The fog parts just enough. The hum softens, mingling with my own breathing. The path grows faint beneath my feet. And then it's gone. The lights drift away. The fog swallows the trail. I am alone. Only the whispers of the forest remain, and the memory of something luminous waiting just beyond the bend. The moon hung low, pale and heavy, spilling light over broken stone. The clearing smelled of wet earth and dust, sharp and cold against my skin. I stepped carefully, each footfall brittle on the fractured rock. Shadows stretched across jagged stones, twisting in ways that didn't belong. I thought I saw a shape flicker at the edge of my vision. Then it vanished, leaving only silence. A faint hum rose from the crevices. It was soft at first, almost melodic, like the wind trying to speak. But beneath it, there was something else, a vibration that prickled my bones. I crouched near a shattered boulder, reaching out to touch the stone. The surface was colder than it should be, wet, slick with some dew I couldn't place. My fingers trembled as the humming pulsed beneath them. The shadows shifted again. Not with the wind, not with me. They moved as though the rocks themselves were breathing, stretching, watching. A sharp scent rose, metallic, faintly burnt, curling around my nose. I wanted to leave. I wanted the clearing to swallow me whole, just to escape the feeling of being observed. But my feet wouldn't obey. My legs felt heavy, weighed down by the dark hum that now thrummed in my chest. Something brushed past my shoulder, soft, almost gentle. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, heart hammering in quiet panic. The shadows quivered, and then they were gone. The moonlight glinted off the stones differently now. Small fragments shimmered like broken glass. I thought I saw eyes among the jagged edges, pale and empty, reflecting the faint glow. Then a soft rasping, like silk dragging over rock, filled the still air. I crouched lower. The hum had grown louder. Or maybe my ears were opening to it, tuning into a frequency my mind had avoided. It pulsed through my chest, my skull, my teeth. I could feel it crawling under my skin. A stone cracked underfoot. I flinched, expecting something to appear. But nothing came, only the clearing, still waiting and humming. The shadows began to lengthen again, curling into shapes I didn't recognize. Each movement was deliberate, patient, as if testing me. I held my breath, tasting the dust and cold iron on my tongue. Then silence, not a soft pause, a vacuum that swallowed the hum entirely. Even my own pulse sounded loud, and I realized I had been holding my breath the whole time. I edged toward the far side of the clearing. The moonlight faded behind a drifting cloud. The jagged stones turned black, and the hum returned, softer now, like a whisper just beyond hearing. Something brushed my hand. Cold, hard, smooth. I yanked it back, heart thundering, sweat prickling my skin. But when I looked, the clearing was empty. I wanted to run, but I couldn't find the path I had come from. The stones glimmered faintly, cruelly in the moonlight, and I realized I might never leave. The hum lingered in the air, a soft, endless vibration, and the shadows moved silently, patiently, around the fractured clearing. The pass was empty. Fog clung to the rocks, cold and wet. My breath left small clouds that vanished too quickly. I noticed it then. A glow, not from the sun, not from the moon. It hovered just above the path, pale and trembling. It pulsed softly like it was breathing. I stepped closer. The ground beneath me was damp, the gravel crunching quietly. Every sound felt sharper, closer. Shadows twisted around the rocks, leaning toward the light. It wasn't just illuminating. It was pulling, bending the dark in strange, slow curves. I could almost feel it moving weightless but heavy. The air smelled faintly of iron and smoke. Cold brushed against my neck, crawling under my jacket. I wanted to turn away, but my legs wouldn't obey. With each pulse, the light seemed more alive. I could see shapes in the mist now, elongated, wavering forms. They weren't quite shadows, not quite solid. They moved with the rhythm of the glow, drifting like reluctant dancers. I whispered to myself, but the words sounded wrong, swallowed by the fog before they left my lips. There was a hum now, low, almost comforting, almost cruel. It filled my chest and my ears at the same time. The closer I got, the more I noticed the small details. The light wasn't constant. It throbbed in irregular beats, sometimes almost dim, almost gone, then bright again, reaching toward me. I could feel the stones under my fingertips as I knelt. The air was damp on my hands, my skin prickling. The glow didn't cast shadows on the ground anymore. It made the ground itself quiver, like the rocks were breathing. I thought about running, but where could I go? The fog had no edges, no escape, only the pull of that hovering light. A sound, no, a pattern caught me. Soft footfalls, but they weren't mine. I didn't turn. I didn't move. The light's pulse seemed to match the rhythm. I realized I wasn't alone, not with another person, not a creature I could name. Just the fold in the air, the shadow bending, the faint hypnotic glow. Time stretched. Seconds became minutes. I felt like I could dissolve into the mist, let the light carry me, and disappear like the fog itself. And then it wavered. For the first time, it flickered in hesitation. The shadows stiffened, recoiling slightly, then melted back into the fog as if nothing had happened. I exhaled without meaning to, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The light hovered, steady again. Not brighter, not dimmer, just waiting. I turned my gaze away for a moment. When I looked back, the glow had shifted slightly. Closer, perhaps, or maybe I had moved. It was impossible to tell. I stepped backward. The mist swallowed my feet, soft and wet. The hum lingered, a faint memory pressed into my bones. I wanted to speak, but the sound caught in my throat. Eventually, I stopped. The light continued its pulse, slow and steady, as if counting something I could not see. I left the past that night, but the glow followed me, not in the sky, not in the fog, just in the spaces between shadows, in the silence that pressed against my ears, a rhythm I could never quite forget. The road had been empty for miles. Fog pressed against my skin, cold and damp. The guardrail leaned at an odd angle, rusted and tired. I stepped closer. Its metal was jagged under my fingers, a hollow groan echoing as the fog swallowed a hole. Shadows moved beyond the rocks. Quick, impossible to catch, but always there. The hum started low, distant. Soft at first, almost a lullaby. I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. Leaves rustled somewhere I couldn't see. Twigs snapped, gentle at first, then louder, like soft footsteps pacing behind me. The guardrail felt colder now. I pressed my palm against the metal. The hum wrapped around my chest, tightening in rhythm with my heartbeat. Shapes flitted in the fog, leaning, stretching, then gone. I blinked, and the world seemed slower. The mist held every sound, every movement, like it was waiting for me to notice. I tried to move, but my legs were heavy, as if the air itself had weight. The hum grew, not just behind me, but inside my skull. I could feel it through my teeth, my throat, through every shallow breath. Rust flakes crumbled under my fingertips. I wanted to tear away, but my eyes were drawn to the shapes between the trees. One lingered longer than the rest. Pale, almost like a figure carved from fog. Its edges blurred. I couldn't tell where it began or ended. I took a step back. The guardrail tilted slightly, groaning like a soft sigh. Something pressed closer behind the fog, leaning just enough to catch my shadow. The hum twisted now, like it had a voice I almost understood. A single note, stretched thin, holding itself against the silence that followed. The shapes darted again, and for a second, the fog swallowed everything. No hum, no shadow, just a faint, lingering chill against my neck. I sank to the cold ground beside the guardrail. Rust stains seeped into my sleeve. The fog moved around me, shifting like slow tides, hiding things that breathed where I could not see. A branch tapped lightly against the metal. A pause, then a soft scrape, almost playful. I didn't dare look. The hum returned, smaller now, tucked between the fog and the metal, breathing with me, waiting, always waiting. I closed my eyes. The fog smelled of wet earth and iron. The world seemed to fold inward. I listened to the hum, to the rust, to the silence stretched wide between the shapes. And then nothing moved. No hum, no shadows, only the leaning guardrail in the fog, still thick, swallowing the road behind me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The rusted metal groaned once more, a final whisper in the fog. The ridge was quiet. Fog rolled over the peaks, pale and slow, like water spilling across stone. I felt it brush my face, cold, damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and old pine. My boots sank into the loose gravel. Each step echoed, though the air seemed to drink most of the sound. There was a hum beneath the wind, low, like the mountain itself was breathing. I thought I saw light, flickering, distant, somewhere beyond the crest. It moved, but not with the wind. It drifted, hesitant, almost shy, between the dark shapes of the peaks. Shadows stretched where they shouldn't. A boulder cast a line that curved like a finger, pointing at nothing. My eyes followed it, but there was nothing to see, only the fog and the cold pressing into my chest. I stopped. The air was different here, thicker, charged. I could hear whispers, maybe my own, maybe the mountains. A shift in the fog. Something solid moved just beyond the pale light. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It hovered or leaned in a way that made the hair on my arms rise. I breathed through my mouth. The taste of metal filled the back of my throat. Each exhale left mist, mingling with the fog already curling around the ridge. The lights, they came again, closer now. Or maybe it was the shadows moving, twisting like wet cloth in the breeze. I couldn't tell. I didn't dare move. A soft scraping. A stone shifted somewhere below me. Then silence. So complete that it made my ears ache. The ridge seemed longer, stretching farther than memory allowed. Peaks bent in impossible ways, angles that shouldn't exist. I thought about turning back, but the path behind was swallowed by gray. The ridge had a hold, and I felt it. I caught a flicker in my peripheral, a shape, pale, stretched, dissolving into fog before I could see it fully. It left a chill that ran down to my knees. I took another step. Gravel crunched softly underfoot. A hum rose from the earth, a vibration that tickled my teeth. I couldn't remember which way was up, or if the sky was even real. The lights flickered one last time. A flash of orange, brief as breath, right at the edge of vision. Shadows danced in response, curling into shapes that felt familiar, but impossible. I leaned against a jagged rock. Its surface was slick, cold, alive somehow. The fog licked around my fingers. I thought I heard soft footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing but rolling gray. The ridge was empty, or maybe it was full. I couldn't tell. I stepped forward again. The fog parted slightly. A peak rose, silent and waiting. I felt its gaze, or perhaps my own reflection, in the dark. I wanted to run. I didn't. The wind carried a faint whisper, curling around my ears, like a secret meant for no one else. I shivered. The lights had vanished. The shadows softened. But the mountain kept breathing, and I stayed listening. The fog was thick that morning. It wrapped around the fallen tower, like it had been waiting. My boots sank slightly into the damp earth. I could see the twisted metal first. Silver strands glinting through the gray mist. A faint spark flickered along a wire, then vanished. The air smelled of wet iron and rust. A low hum pulsed beneath my feet. Not loud, not sharp, just a vibration, deep, steady, insistent. I moved closer. Shapes shifted in the fog. They were human-like, then they weren't. I blinked. They melted into the gray, only to flicker again just at the edge of my vision. The tower's skeleton leaned like it had given up. Sparks crackled along broken lines, soft as a heartbeat. I felt my chest tighten. Alone, yes, but something else was here. A thin wind twisted through the wires. It hummed with the sparks' rhythm. The mist smelled sharper now, wet stone and ozone. I crouched to touch the metal. Cold, sharp, tiny electric shocks danced across my skin. The hum grew heavier. I felt it in my bones, low and steady. Shapes moved closer, or maybe I moved closer. They whispered in ways I couldn't hear. Movement without sound. A presence without name. The ground beneath me quivered faintly. I stepped back, breath shallow. A shadow slid along the wreckage. It paused, and watched. I could see fragments of sky, pale through the fog. But the tower blocked most of it, like it wanted to keep the world away. The sparks leapt higher now, irregular, almost deliberate, each one painting the mist with white-blue light. I thought of walking away, of leaving this place quiet, untouched. But my feet stayed. Something rooted me here. A shape emerged closer than before. I could almost see its eyes. They reflected the sparks, tiny points of white fire. It didn't move like a person. It moved like the fog itself, curling, stretching, endless. The hum beneath me shifted tone. Higher now, but still vibrating the earth. I realized it was coming from the tower, too. The tower, the shapes, the mist, they were all connected, breathing together, waiting. I tried call out. Nothing came. The fog swallowed my voice. I swallowed my fear instead. One last spark leapt from the highest wire. It struck the ground, sending a ripple through the mist. And then silence. No hum, no crackle, no movement. I breathed in the wet, metallic air. The shapes had vanished, or maybe I had stopped seeing. The tower lay broken, yet alive in its own strange way. I turned my steps away, but even as I walked, the hum whispered beneath the soles of my feet, and the fog moved with me, soft, patient, endless. The fog had settled again, thick and low, curling around the streetlights like smoke. The night was quiet, but not empty. Something in the hush felt deliberate, as if it were holding its breath. I walked slowly, boots pressing into damp pavement. each step muffled and hollow. The lights along the path flickered, almost dancing, like they knew I was watching. A rhythm pulsed through the air, steady, slow. I tried to ignore it, but it pressed against my chest. Then I saw it, a shadow, dark and still, standing against the fog at the edge of the street. Its form was wrong, too long, too wide in places it shouldn't be. It moved with the fog, but never quite blended. I froze. The lights flickered again. Each pulse made the shadow stretch and shrink, as if it were breathing, but it had no chest, no shoulders, nothing human. A soft wind stirred, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something metallic, iron, maybe blood. I felt it brush past my arm, cold and thin, like fingers trailing just above the skin. I couldn't look away. The shadow tilted almost casually, but it felt intentional. I could sense it watching me, though I knew my eyes could not pierce the darkness it carried. It waited, and in the waiting, the world around me seemed to slow. I tried to step backward, quietly, but the gravel beneath my shoes protested. Each crunch sounded like a shout in the fog. The lights pulsed again, and with each pulse, the shadow's shape shifted slightly, mimicking me. But wrong, an echo with a twisted intent. A low hum rose in my chest, not from my body, exactly, but from the space around me. It vibrated through the fog, a soft, insistent whisper of energy. I could feel in my bones. The wind died. Only the rhythm remained. I thought I saw a hand reach toward me, long, thin, impossible. Then it vanished into the darkness. The fog seemed to swallow it. I wanted to run, but something in the shadow stillness held me. A quiet weight pressing on my shoulders, soft but unyielding. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed before it formed. Only breath escaped me, shallow, uneven, shaking against a chill. The streetlights pulsed again, slower this time, deliberate, and with each pulse, I felt a memory I didn't recognize, creeping from the edges of my mind. Moments I couldn't place. Shadows of faces I had never seen. It leaned, or I leaned, I couldn't tell. Everything bent toward a rhythm I could not escape. The fog thickened, curling higher, pressing against my skin, wet and heavy. A soft rustling came from the distance. Leaves, maybe, but uneven, deliberate. I sensed movement just beyond the edge of my vision, always at the corner, never fully present. The shadow shifted again. It became taller, thinner, the edges blurring into the fog. The rhythm of the light slowed even more, dragging the night into a stretch I could not measure. Each pulse echoed through me, an insistence I could not name. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was closer, not in the street, not on the pavement, but closer, closer than I could have imagined. A shiver traced my spine, moving like liquid ice. The pulse slowed, almost a heartbeat, or maybe mine echoing in the dark. I realized then I had never been alone, and perhaps I never had been. The fog lifted slightly, revealing nothing but the street. The shadow had vanished, or maybe it had never left. I felt the cold where it had been, a lingering weight pressing against the air. I turned and walked, slowly, almost reluctantly, away from that place. Each step echoed too loudly in the silence, a reminder that I was still here. The rhythm remained faint, deep in the fog, pulsing like a memory I could not name. I reached my door. The lights inside were warm, steady, human. But when I looked back, down the street, I knew it was still there, waiting, watching. The fog curled again, swallowing the edges of the world. And I could feel it in my chest, in my breath, in the soft, quiet rhythm that would not leave me. The fog pressed close, thick and damp, curling around the jagged stones like fingers. Each breath tasted wet earth and something colder, older. I moved slowly, boots sinking into the soft, damp moss. The clearing stretched wider than I expected, though the edges blurred into gray. Shadows clung to the stones, bending and stretching. I thought I saw one shift just a little, as if it knew I was here. A pale light hovered near the far edge. It floated, drifting lazily, almost humming in the quiet. I blinked. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Soft, rustling reached me from the undergrowth, leaves brushing each other, or something brushing the leaves. The fog muffled the noise, but it lingered in my chest. I stepped closer to the stones. The air smelled of wet stone and something faintly metallic. Cold moisture clung to my fingertips as I touched the rough surface. The floating lights multiplied. They drifted silently, slow and deliberate. Sometimes they disappeared into the fog, sometimes closer, watching. I wanted to move, but my feet felt heavy, rooted in the moss. The shadows leaned, stretching, reaching toward me with impossible angles. A hum rose in the distance, low, steady, vibrating against my ribs. I thought it came from the stones or the fog itself. The lights twisted, circling the clearing now. They weren't random. There was purpose, intent, awareness. I realized and they weren't just lights. They were eyes, or pretending to be. My own shadow stretched long and pale across the moss. It flickered unnaturally, jerking when nothing moved. I held my breath, listening to the silence between each heartbeat. Something cold brushed my ankle. I froze. The fog shivered around me, whispering against my skin. I stepped back, and the stones seemed to lean closer. Shadows pooled, curling at the base like liquid. I felt them watching, waiting, silent patience pressing down. The lights drew nearer, floating just above the moss. I could see shapes now, faint outlines within them, faces maybe, but as I tried to focus, they blurred, soft and impossible to hold. The hum deepened, vibrating through the fog and into my chest. I want to call out, but my voice vanished into gray. Only my soft, uneven breath answered me. A single stone caught my eye. It was jagged, taller than the others, and the fog clung to it like smoke. Something moved behind it, slow, deliberate, waiting. I turned to leave, but the clearing had shifted. Paths I remember were gone, swallowed by mist. The lights drifted between me and the edges, silent, deliberate. I dropped to the moss, pressing my hands into the damp earth. Cold seeped through my clothes, but I couldn't look away. Each light hovered, drifting closer, circling, silent and unblinking. The fog whispered now, soft voices I couldn't understand. Words brushed my ears, fleeting and hollow. I shivered, alone in the vast, silent clearing. Eventually, the lights drifted apart, returning to their edges. The shadows slackened, retreating to the stones. I remained crouched, chest heaving, listening to the fog breathe. The clearing seemed empty again, but I knew it wasn't. The stones waited, the fog waited, and somewhere, deep within the gray, I was still being watched. I stood finally, legs stiff, and walked slowly back toward where the trees should have been. Every step pressed through the damp moss, soft and echoing in the quiet. And though the lights were gone, I could feel them lingering, drifting just behind the fog. The wind had that sharp, empty bite of late October. The cliffside stretched above me, jagged and silent, the edge crumbling under my boots with every careful step. Fog clung to the rocks, pale and wet, sliding down into a hollow that yawned like it was breathing. I thought I heard at first the faint hum of something alive, or maybe the cliffs were just settling, but the hollow felt wrong. A flicker of light danced far below, small, pale, and unsteady. It moved along the rocks, then disappeared when I blinked. I swallowed. My hands were slick with cold sweat, and the air tasted of salt and decay. I climbed a ridge that led closer to the hollow. Each footfall made a hollow echo, as if the cliff was listening to me, as if it had been waiting. The light returned, stuttering like a candle in wind. Shapes moved along the rocks, thin, too tall, bending in impossible ways. I froze, soft rustling, just at the edge of hearing, like clothing brushing against stone. I thought of stepping forward, but the air was thicker here, heavy with something I couldn't name. It smelled faintly of wet earth and metal. The hollow seemed deeper than it should have been, its shadow swallowing the pale light whole. I leaned over the edge, breath catching in my throat. There were shapes again. They didn't look like anything I knew. They slipped behind jagged stones, vanished before I could see them fully. I moved closer, my boots pressed into mud that smelled faintly sour. The hollow whispered, or maybe my mind did. A soft scuttling echoed from within, and I realized the flickering light wasn't coming from above, but from the very walls themselves, tiny pulses of pale, uneven glow. My pulse matched it. I could feel it in my ears, a low, trembling vibration that made my teeth hum. I crouched, trying to peer into the hollow, but every time I got near, the light and shapes fled just beyond reach. I could hear soft footsteps. Or was it my own? The rocks shifted. A shadow stretched, reaching toward me, then melted back into the hollow's blackness. I want to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat, sharp and thin. I backed away slowly. The air turned colder, wet with a mist that smelled faintly like ash. The light flickered again, this time higher, as if whatever was had climbed the rocks, watching. I felt watched. Every instinct screamed to leave. Still, something held me there. The hollow called softly, a whisper carried on the wind, too low for words, but urgent enough to press against my skin. I imagined falling, and the shapes below rising to meet me, moving in ways no body should. The sun dipped low, leaving only gray, and the pale light in the hollow grew faint. I thought it would disappear, but it lingered, pulsing quietly, like a heartbeat in stone. I left the edge. The fog swallowed my retreat. Behind me, the hollow stayed silent, still and waiting. The shapes vanished. The pale light flickered once, then dimmed into nothing. Even now, I can feel it. The hollow, stretching down into the cliffside, empty and alive, breathing under the wind, watching. The fog pressed close to the ground, thick and damp, curling around the collapsed tents. Lanterns hung from poles, their pale light trembling as if caught in a sigh. I stepped forward, boots sinking into soft, wet soil. The air smelled of ash and something older, moss rot, and smoke long gone. Every breath I took felt borrowed, fragile. A soft rustle brushed past me, too light to be human, too deliberate to be wind. The first tent leaned awkwardly, its fabric sagging like tired skin. Inside, shadows pooled in corners, darker than the fog. I wanted to reach out, touch the canvas, but my hands felt heavy, as if the air resisted. A whisper of movement drew my eyes to a lantern farther off. Its glow flickered, casting shapes that weren't there moments before. I could swear a figure paused behind it, pale and still. I blinked. Nothing. Only the fog, endless and cold. I moved along the narrow path between tents. The earth smelled damp and sharp, like crushed pine needles. Leaves whispered under my feet. Soft footsteps that weren't mine. Something shifted at the edge of my vision. Another shadow, gone when I looked directly. A tent flap lifted with a sigh, slow and deliberate. Inside, the darkness was almost viscous, clinging to the shapes of forgotten chairs and sleeping bags. I thought I saw a hand, slender, pale, drifting out of reach. A hum, low and hollow, thrummed beneath the silence. The lanterns flickered again. Shadows stretched like fingers across the fog. I felt the air pulse, a quiet heartbeat that wasn't mine. I stopped. My own breath seemed loud, ragged against the stillness. I knelt by a small fire pit, gray ash spilling over jagged stones. Scorched logs lay in unnatural patterns, shapes I almost recognized. A sudden gust made the ash curl toward me, like smoke from another time. The smell of charred would mix with damp earth, bitter and intimate. Every direction I looked, something moved. Not fast, but enough, just enough to feel watched. I pressed my hand to a tent pole. Cold, solid. A soft groan echoed across the clearing, and I flinched, almost certain it was someone calling my name. The fog thickened, curling higher around my shoulders. Lanterns dimmed to flickers, fading, until only faint points of light remained. I could hear the static of wind in broken branches, like voices murmuring from far away. I dared to step closer to the farthest tent. The flap shivered again. Inside, shapes moved, not human, but not quite nothing. I froze, heart thudding in my ears. The shadows seemed to lean toward me, patient, silent. A faint scrape along the ground made me whirl. Nothing there, only the fog swallowing every footprint I'd left. It felt like the campsite had been waiting, for me, for someone to notice. I leaned against a lantern post. The light warmed my fingers, trembling like it had a pulse. The hum beneath the earth grew louder, almost comforting, almost inviting. But the shadows pressed closer. And I knew Somewhere beneath the fog and ash, the campsite wasn't empty. I left my boots in the soft mud at the edge of clearing. The fog swallowed my steps as I turned. Lanterns blinked, and then nothing, only silence. The air held its breath. So did I. The pass was empty. Fog clung to the rocks, soft and thick, curling around my ankles. The air tasted of cold stone and damp earth. I saw them first as faint glimmers. Small orbs, hovering just above the ground, drifting like they belonged somewhere else. Each pulse of light felt to where. I slowed my steps. The shadows stretched, long and wrong, curling around the cracks in the cliff face. Something in the corner of my vision shivered. The orbs moved silently, gliding past me. Sometimes they paused, lingering near my shadow, and I could swear they pulsed faster when I looked too long. The wind whispered across the pass, soft but hollow, stirring the dry leaves into restless murmurs. I pressed my hands to my chest. My breath felt too loud. One orb floated closer, pale, almost white, like it had no weight at all. I reached out just to touch it, but it drifted away, playful, intelligent, knowing. I walked careful, each step crunching the loose gravel. Shadows bent around me, as though trying to reach my feet. I could feel the hum of the orbs beneath my skin. The fog thickened suddenly. I couldn't see the rocks in front of me, couldn't see the edges of the path. A faint rustling followed. Not the wind, not the leaves. Something lighter, smaller, circling just behind. I stopped. The orbs gathered, circling each other like they were waiting. Their pulses sped, soft but insistent. It felt like they were thinking, feeling, watching. A shadow flickered at the edge of the mist. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. The fog swallowed it, leaving only the hovering lights. They rose slowly, drifting upward, and the shadows that had followed stretched and thinned. I felt the ache of being alone and not alone at the same time. The air smelled of wet stone and something faintly metallic, like the memory of blood, old and cold. I could hear the hum of the orbs in the gaps between my thoughts. One orb lingered beside me, brushing against my arm. It pulsed warmly, almost tenderly, and I felt a shiver run through my spine. I walked again. The pass felt longer than it should, the fog thicker than before. Shadows leaned in from the cliffs, writhing softly, tried to match the movement of the lights. I kept my eyes on the orbs, not daring to look up, not daring to look down. They pulsed brighter as I moved. Sometimes they split, then rejoined like silent laughter. The wind carried faint whispers I couldn't understand. I wanted to run, but my feet moved as if tethered to the ground. Each step was slow, deliberate, measured. At the end of the pass, the fog thinned. The orbs hovered once more, lingering a heartbeat before scattering like ashes into the night. I stood alone in the pale light. Shadows had returned to the rocks. The air smelled of wet stone and the faintest trace of smoke. And then silence. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Someone had followed me, and yet left me. The pass was empty again. But the hum lingered. The gate leaned awkwardly, a crooked silhouette swallowed by the fog. I could see the hinges, rusted and stiff, as though time had forgotten them. A chill pressed into my skin, brushing to the thin fabric of my jacket. Beyond the gate, faint lights hovered, soft and unsteady. They didn't flicker like lanterns. They pulsed, slowly, like something breathing. I felt the ground beneath me hum. Barely, a vibration that pressed upward through my boots, through my bones. I stepped closer. The mist clung to my cheeks, damp and heavy. I could smell wet metal and soil, thick and cloying, like the earth was holding its breath. A shadow moved behind one of the pale lights, not fully formed, just a shape wavering uncertain. I held my breath. The hum grew, just enough to brush my ears with a soft, steady pulse. My fingers brushed the gate. The metal was cold and sticky with rust, flaking onto my palm. I wanted to step back. The fog twisted, curling around my ankles, slow and deliberate. The light seemed closer now. Or maybe I had moved closer without noticing. A soft scrape echoed, low and deliberate. Something slid along the ground beyond the gate. I couldn't see it clearly, just the hint of movement, pale and wrong. I tried to tell myself it was only the wind. But the hum wasn't the wind. It was deeper, older, waiting. I leaned closer to the gate. The vibration tickled through my chest, like a heartbeat too large for the world. I could almost feel in my teeth a faint buzz, insistent and quiet. The fog shifted again. A shadow stretched long, brushing against the lights. I thought I saw a figure or a pile of something, half buried in the haze. I shivered. My jacket rustled. The sound felt loud, intrusive, echoing into the quiet. I imagined it echoed beyond the fog, into the place where the lights hovered, into the shadow that moved. A smell came with it, faint, acrid, like old iron and smoke. It made my stomach tighten. I wanted to pull my hand from the gate. Then silence. The hum stopped. The lights paused, still, as though frozen by the fog itself. Even the shadow hesitated, then vanished into nothing. I waited. The fog pressed closer. The gate didn't move, but I could hear it whispering in tiny creaks, each one echoing in the soft night. My fingers lingered on the metal, feeling the roughness, the heat of it where the sun had long since gone. I imagined whatever had moved beyond the gate, just on the edge of perception, watching, waiting. I stepped back. The lights flickered once, faintly, then steadied again. The vibration returned, softer now, like a pulse fading at dawn. I didn't look back as I walked away. The fog wrapped around the gate, like it was swallowing a whole. The rusted hinges groaned once more. And then nothing. The pale lights blinked behind the mist, distant. The hum lingered only in memory. I didn't need to turn around. I could feel it, still, hovering just beyond the crooked gate. The night was heavy, damp, with a fog that clung to my skin like cold silk. The slope ahead rose slowly, pale beneath the lantern's distant glow. It flickered, small and stubborn, as if holding on to some private warmth. My feet pressed into the wet grass, each step quiet, almost swallowed. A hum settled around me, low, rhythmic, almost breathing. It wasn't coming from the lantern. It wasn't coming from anywhere, but it moved with me. Shadows pulled beneath the lantern, black shapes that seemed to stretch taller as I climbed. I tried to count them. They swayed. I lost count. The wind shifted. It carried something faint, a metallic tang or maybe old rain, rusty and sweet. It settled on my tongue, clung to my throat. I thought I saw a movement along the slope, soft, deliberate steps that weren't mine. Each time I paused, the hum grew sharper, clearer, pressing against my ribs. The lantern burned a little brighter now, almost impatient. Its light skittered across the shadows, drawing them toward me. One of them trembled, then seemed to vanish, leaving only the damp smell of earth and something older, forgotten. I reached out, fingers brushing through the mist. It was cold, wet, more than just fog, like a presence sliding over my skin. The hum followed my fingers, curling around them, whispering in a way I could feel but not hear. The slope grew steeper, my lungs tight with the weight of quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, muffled under the persistent hum. Something shifted behind me. Soft footsteps, too light to be sure. The lantern pulsed. I swore it paused mid-flicker. Waiting, I paused too. Nothing. And then the shadows moved as one. They leaned toward the light, stretching, bending in impossible ways. I could see the slope itself writhing under them, the grass bending like fingers, reaching. The hum turned hollow. It filled the spaces where air should have been. I breathed it in, my lungs tasting rust and wet stone, and for a moment I thought I could see it. Something pale, leaning from the lantern, almost human, a soft rustling past my ear. No wind, no leaves, just something brushing closer, brushing the night itself. I reached the top of the slope. The lantern floated there, steady, as if anchored by someone I could not name. The shadows gathered at its base, a writhing black tide. I stood at the edge, unable to step closer, unable to look away. The hum softened, almost tender now. It wrapped around my shoulders, pressed my hair against my neck. I felt the slope beneath me, felt the weight of the shadows without seeing them. I want to call out, but my voice was nothing. Only the lantern pulsed. Only the hum lingered. I turned slowly, Footsteps careful, silent. The slope behind me looked empty, but the fog held secrets I could not name. Every shadow I had seen remained somehow in the corner of my vision. The lantern glowed. It was patient. It waited. I walked down. The hum faded just enough to let me breathe. The slope receded, pale light shrinking with every careful step. And yet, when I stopped, it felt like it was still there. Above, on the rise, the lantern waited, and the shadows waited beneath it. I did not look back again. The mountain air was thin, sharp against my skin. Fog curled around the narrow trail, thick and cold, curling at my ankles like pale fingers. I stepped carefully, stones loose beneath my boots, and the path seemed to stretch farther than it should. Shadows lengthened, then vanished, leaving only the faint outline of twisted trees leaning over the trail. I thought I saw shapes moving just beyond the fog, quick, impossible blinks, and my chest tightened. The wind hummed softly, carrying a damp, earthy scent that clung to my hair and clothes. A light appeared, at first a pale glow, drifting just above the ground. Then another, and another, floating silent, like tiny lanterns guiding some path I didn't want to follow. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. The fog shifted. The lights moved in a slow, floating rhythm, circling me, always just out of reach. Each step I took seemed to echo farther than it should, and the trail beneath me groaned with every shift. A rustling came from the edge of the path. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Something brushed against the mist, soft, deliberate, watching. The trees leaned closer, their branches scratching against each other. I smelled wet wood and moss, something ancient and decaying. The light drifted ahead, swaying, beckoning, and I felt my skin prickle as if the fog itself was alive. The trail twisted sharply, tighter than before, the rocks slick underfoot. I slipped once, caught myself on the damp ground, and my hand brushed something cold. Not stone, something softer, pliant, and pulsing slightly. I thought I heard whispers, quiet, unintelligible, like distant voices carried by the wind. But when I stopped to listen, there was only silence, the fog pressing in from all sides. The floating lights were still there, hovering, waiting, patient. I walked faster, my boots crunching against fallen leaves, the smell of wet pine filling my nose. The lights flickered closer, and shadows stretched across the ground, jagged and unreal. A sudden drop in the air made goosebumps rise on my arms. I tripped, landing hard against the damp earth. The fog enveloped me, thick and suffocating, and I could feel the trail twisting beneath me, endless and unyielding. The lights drifted above, reflecting in my eyes, making everything pale and shimmering. A low hum vibrated through the ground, soft, almost melodic. It made my chest ache, my head spin, and the hairs on my neck stand. I could feel it in my bones, deep and insistent, a warning I couldn't name. I wanted to turn back, but the trail behind me had vanished into gray, swallowed by the fog, erased like it never existed. I was alone, only the floating lights and the whispers, barely there, guiding me forward. Branches brushed my face. I could taste damp earth and cold metal in the air. The lights swirled above, forming shapes I couldn't comprehend, shifting shadows that danced just beyond my sight. I stumbled again, and something soft pressed against my shoulder. Not a hand, not a creature, something alive, breathing, patient. I couldn't move. My heart thudded so loud it drowned out everything else. The fog thinned slightly, revealing a jagged bend in the trail. The lights gathered there, clustered together, glowing pale and unwavering. I stepped forward, my legs trembling, drawn by something I couldn't see. And then the path ended. Not with a drop, not with a cliff, but nothing, just pale light and fog, and the trail that had carried me here dissolved into silence. The floating lights hovered, and for a moment, I felt eyes everywhere, on me, beneath me, all around. I took a breath, wet and cold, and the fog swallowed it. The lights drifted closer, circling, unhurried, and I understood, in the quiet hum and the soft rustle branches, that the hollow pathway never truly lets you leave. I closed my eyes. The fog pressed against my face, damp and heavy, and the lights drifted on, always ahead, always waiting. The path ended in rubble. A cabin leaned into the rocks, with splintered, roof sagging. Pale light trembled through cracks, casting uneven shapes over wet stone. The air smelled of moss, rot, and something colder beneath. I stepped closer, boots pressing into loose gravel. The wind carried a faint hum, rising and falling almost like breathing. I wanted to stop, but my legs moved anyway. Each step made a dry crack, and I hoped it wasn't heard. The door hung on one hinge. A draft pushed it slightly. Then it swung back with a soft groan. Inside, the cabin was darker than the night outside. The pale lights flickered along the walls, shifting with a pulse. I could feel it before I saw it, a vibration underfoot, like the floor itself was hesitant, uncertain. It hummed with a tone that almost whispered my name. I didn't respond. A chair had fallen, legs broken and twisted. Dust floated to the faint glow, sparkling like frozen embers. And there in the corner, shadows pooled thick and still. I sensed a presence, not moving, just waiting. The hum rose, then softened, like breathing from the rocks themselves. I pressed my hand against the splintered wall. It shivered under my touch, a subtle tremor that ran through my palm. The smell of wet pine mixed with something metallic. Iron, I thought. Blood. Maybe long gone but remembered. I took a step toward the center of the cabin. The floor groaned, echoing beneath my feet. Then silence, almost too sudden, like the hum had been swallowed. A faint warmth brushed my face. Fleeting, but the shadows didn't move. They simply lingered. The light flickered again, faster this time. Shapes formed briefly. Figures leaning, watching, dissolving before I could see. I blinked. Each flicker left the cabin emptier, yet heavier, darker. I thought I heard soft footsteps behind me. Or was it the wind in the beams? I turned slowly. Nothing. A window rattled in its frame. The glass cracked, thin lines spreading like veins. I reached out, but the pane was cold, icy against my fingertips. The hum returned, low and steady, pressing into the cracks in the walls. The floor beneath me shifted again, which splintered in a sigh. Dust fell in slow motion, catching the pale light like tiny stars. I realized then I wasn't just looking at the cabin. I was inside its memory, inhaling the weight of its collapse, feeling the last breath of its solitude. A shadow moved across the far wall. Slow, deliberate, impossible to place. I froze. The air tightened around my chest. I wanted to leave, but the path back was swallowed by darkness. Even the moon had retreated. Only the flickering pale light remained, small and fragile, like it might vanish if I blinked. A hum rose again, sharper this time, and I pressed my hands over my ears. But it wasn't in my ears. It was under the floor, in the beams, in the rocks leaning against the cabin's bones. It called without words, echoing inside my chest. I stumbled toward the door, dragging my feet through debris. The cabin leaned further, as if watching me leave, would groan under its own weight, dust clouding in spirals. I paused at the threshold, heart hammering, ears straining. Then a soft sigh, barely audible, brushed my cheek. A warmth that was not the sun. I stepped back, and the cabin exhaled around me, a living weight settling in. The hum receded, fading into the night, like a dream slipping from memory. I didn't look back again. The pale lights winked out, one by one. The rocks, the leaning beams, the broken windows, all became a quiet shadow. The path home was silent. And yet, I could still feel the cabin breathing behind me. The moon hung low, spilling pale light across the jagged stones. They jutted from the earth like broken teeth, sharp and unyielding. The air smelled of cold moss, damp soil, and something metallic that I couldn't name. Each step I took pressed into loose gravel, small echoes vanishing into the night. Shadows stretched and shrank across the terrain, as if the stones themselves were breathing. I felt the wind pick up, brushing against my neck like soft fingers, brushing away certainty. I noticed the lights first in the corner of my eye. They drifted between the stones, faint and pulsing like tiny heartbeats. I stopped. They didn't flicker like torches or lanterns. They floated. A rustling came from somewhere deeper, just beyond the reach of the moon. Leaves scraping over rock. Then silence. I swallowed, my breath sharp in the cold air. The stones shifted, or maybe my mind did. They seemed taller now, edges glinting silver. Each one held a shadow that wasn't entirely shadow. The pulsing lights moved closer, weaving between the stones with a deliberate rhythm. I wanted to step back, to run, but my feet held me. The ground hummed faintly beneath me, a low vibration that I could feel in my chest more than hear. It matched the lights. Slow, deliberate, insistent. I crouched behind a stone, fingernails scraping the rough surface. The pulse of light hovered near me. A whisper of movement. A shape I couldn't name brushed past the edge of my vision. I blinked. Gone. A shiver ran up my spine. The stones no longer looked like stones. They were taller, leaning toward me, angled just enough to hide something between them. Something watching. I tried to breathe slowly. The scent of wet earth grew stronger, tinged now with something bitter, iron-like. Each pulse of light seemed to carry it closer, a coldness that pressed against my skin. The shadows wavered, forming figures, or maybe just teasing the shape of figures in my mind. I moved cautiously around the edges, hoping to see where the lights came from. The stones groaned softly under a weight that wasn't mine. A hollow sound, like air trapped in an old bottle. I want to call out, but my voice was gone, stolen by the night. Then one light stopped directly before me. It pulsed slower now, deliberate, almost patient. I could feel it in the tips of my fingers. Cold, empty. I knelt to touch the stone beside it. The surface was slick with dew. I could feel the vibration again, faint like the heartbeat of the earth itself, or something beneath it. The light shifted, merging with shadow. For a moment, I thought I saw a face. Pale, thin, stretched too long. It disappeared when I blinked. I stumbled back. The stone seemed to lean closer, with every step. Rustling, whispering. The air thickened with the smell of damp decay. The lights flickered, a rhythm too regular to be natural. I tried to remember why I had come here. Curiosity, foolishness, a dare I couldn't recall. The stones glimmered under the moon again. Alone, I realized, is not just without people. Alone is being surrounded by things that do not belong. Watching, I sank to the ground, pressed my hands against cold rock, and waited. The lights drifted above me now, slow, deliberate, like they were counting. I counted with them, silently, though I didn't understand what I was counting. The wind carried a faint hum, almost a song. It rose and fell with the pulse of the lights. I closed my eyes. Even in darkness, the stones glimmered. Even in silence, I could hear them shifting, breathing around me. And then the lights began to fade. The pulse slowed and the shadows receded. The moonlight caught the edges of the stones one last time. They stood silent and jagged, indifferent. I rose carefully, every muscle stiff, every nerve alert. The forest beyond waited quietly. No whispers, no hum, only the faint scent of iron and cold earth. I left the stones behind, knowing they would not follow. But the pulse lingered in my chest, slow, insistent, unseen, unending. The fog had settled low in the valley. Cold seeped through my jacket, and the air smelled faintly of wet pine and earth. Every step I took sank slightly into the damp underbrush, soft and muffled. I saw it then. A small shelter, tucked between gnarled pines and moss-covered rocks. The wood was dark, streaked with rain, its edges rough and splintered. A padlock glinted faintly in the pale, drifting light. I stopped. The forest felt different here. Quieter. Not empty, but waiting. A shadow shifted behind the small window slit. It moved slow, deliberate, almost stretching the darkness. I pressed closer to the bark of a nearby tree. The wood smelled sour, damp with decay, a faint smoke lingering beneath it. The lock was old, rusted at the hinges, yet it held firm. I traced its cold metal with my fingertips. Every time I drew near, the shelter seemed to breathe, a soft exhale, almost like the wind, almost like something else. I crouched. The window offered only slivers of the interior. Pale light seeped out, shaking against the boards. Shadows twisted along the walls. One stretched long across the floor. Then it disappeared. I could hear it then. A faint rustling, like paper dragged across stone. It stopped when I moved. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The smell of damp wood and something iron rose to my nose. The padlock caught in my gaze again. I wanted to push it, pry it, feel the cold give beneath my fingers. But I didn't. Some part of me knew I wasn't meant to enter. A low hum settled in the air. It wasn't coming from the forest, not from the wind. It was closer, deeper, under the soil, beneath the roots. A vibration that made my chest press tight. I could feel it in my teeth, in my fingers. The shadows inside moved again. Faster now, slipping over each other, folding into corners. I thought I saw a face. A glimpse of pale skin, a hollow eye. It vanished when I blinked. Silence returned. Too thick, too absolute. It pressed against my ears, my temples. I stepped back, unsure the shelter had grown or if the forest had shrunk. Leaves whispered underfoot. I turned, listening to the small sounds I usually ignored. Each one stretched too long. Each one carried a weight. A faint scraping came from the padlock. Metal against metal. I didn't move. My breath caught, and then it stopped. The window slit, pulsed with light. Not bright, but insistent. Shadows gathered at the corners, filling every crack and crevice. The air inside smelled of wet stone and old smoke. And something else sour, faint, like fear itself. I thought of leaving, of running back through the fog, letting my feet find the trail, without looking. But the shelter held me in its gaze. Even through the locked door, it was alive and patient. Something shifted again, closer this time. A soft footstep, brushing across the floorboards. I pressed myself against a tree, heart hammering, yet still watching. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. The shadows inside moved slower now, like they had noticed me staring, like they were aware. Breath caught in my throat. I could almost hear it, soft, rasping, hesitant. I stepped back. The fog wrapped around me, cold and damp, carrying the smell of pine and decay. The forest seemed to lean in, waiting, and then the shelter exhaled. A long, quiet sigh that rattled the boards, rattled my ribs, rattled the silence itself. The padlock glinted again in the pale light, holding, refusing. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just listened. The shadows inside twisted. The pale light shimmered. And somewhere deep beneath the hum, beneath the trees, I knew it was waiting. Not angry, not urgent, patient. And so I left it there, standing in the fog, rusted padlock and all. The forest swallowed my footprints. The shelter remained, quiet, watching, alive in its pale light.